Hello my dear listener and welcome to our channel. So Elisa, Mom began. I did a mental eye roll. I knew what was coming again. Have you decided on your future yet? It was an ongoing question with my mom. There really wasn't a whole lot to decide, either go to the local community college and take all the classes I could before transferring to the local university to finish my degree, or get a low-paying job as just a high school graduate. There really weren't many other options open to me. Oh, and let's not forget that I would also need to work at least a part-time job to afford even going to the local community college. Mom, you know that I've always been fascinated by the medical field. Sure, I would love to become a doctor, but there is no possible way for me to go to medical school without ending up with a couple $100,000 in student loans. I'm probably just going to go to the local community college to get my lower-level classes out of the way, then transfer to the local university to finish my degree in nursing. That way, I can live at home while going to school to help save money. But sweetie, you're an excellent student and are going to graduate in the top 5% of your class. You have a 3.96 GPA, surely you have gotten several scholarship offers, Mom complained. Okay, let's go over this again. Yes, I am at the top of my graduating class. Yes, you would think that would generate some pretty good scholarship offers. Normally that is true. The issue is that I am graduating at the top of a class in one of the most underperforming high schools in the country. Colleges not only look at your GPA, high school transcript, and every other factor in your high school career, but they also look at the school itself. Graduating at the top of a failing high school is pretty much the same as being a mediocre student at an average high school. Sure, I got a couple of partial scholarship offers from average colleges, but nothing that would cover everything that I would need. I would have to make up the difference, and Lord knows that there is no possible way that we can afford that. Sometimes the truth hurts. It did on that occasion. I saw the look on Mom's face when she was confronted with the facts. It wasn't her fault that we were in this position. We were stuck in the lower middle class purgatory. Dad made just enough to disqualify me from getting financial aid for lower income students, but not nearly enough to be of any significant help in sending me to college. In fact, none of my family was even close to being well off. Even my grandmother lived a pretty austere life. She didn't really get much out of her 3 divorces. I guess that's what happens when you make poor choices in relationships and your partners take measures to protect their assets. What about the extra classes you have already taken at the community college? Mom asked. Yes, I was taking a couple of courses at the community college already. I was also doing quite well in them. Mom, they really don't look too hard at those. Okay, so they are actually college classes, but they are remedial classes. They basically look at them as an extension of high school classes. The chemistry course I took over the summer was essentially a preparatory course for real college chemistry. Anyway, here I was, entering my final semester of high school and trying to figure out my future. As I mentioned earlier, I had always been fascinated by the medical field. I loved watching the evening dramas on TV that revolved around hospitals and doctors. My secret indulgence was also watching certain videos online. Anyway, it looked like my dream of becoming a doctor was not going to come true given the economics of my life. The best that I would be able to do was to become a nurse. Sure, being a nurse was an honorable profession and it would still be in the medical field. There was no shame in that. Still, it was not my dream. Such is life. Dreams rarely come true for most of us. All we can do is make the best of the hand that we are dealt. Okay, so I should probably give some background on what my family situation is. I am an only child. My family consists of me, my mother and father, and my grandmother. As stated earlier, my grandmother has been married and divorced 3 times, each time due to infidelity. My parents are married and have been for all of my life. I am old enough now to recognize that my parents do not exactly have the loving relationship that a lot of my friends' parents have. They don't sleep in the same room and I have never heard or had any indication that they have ever been intimate since I have been alive. Actually, I realized several years ago that my mother was having an affair. I never knew why Dad was putting up with that. Sadly, I lost a lot of respect for him once I realized what was going on. In his defense, which I came to understand later, I never saw him go out with another woman in all that time. As far as I could tell, he remained faithful to my mother. So that brings us up to date. The day after my conversation with my mom, I decided to get the ball rolling and enroll in the community college for the next semester. I was in the library, working on my laptop to fill out the forms, when suddenly I felt a presence next to me. I looked up and saw a very attractive woman in her mid-40s standing by my table. She was dressed professionally in a smart business suit with a skirt that reached her knees and a matching jacket. Her blouse was a bold red, and she wore relatively conservative heels. "Are you Elisa Compton?" she asked. I had the feeling she already knew the answer but was just being polite. "Yes, I am. Can I help you?" I answered. She chuckled and replied, "No, but I'm sure I can assist you." She placed a business card on the table and said, "Please be at this address tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. I know you don't have any previous engagements at that time, and it would definitely be in your best interest to be there." With that, she turned on her heels and walked away, her movements catching my eye. She looked very confident and elegant. I couldn't help but be intrigued by her. Yes, she was about 20 years older than me, but still, she was striking. You've probably started to figure something out. I've known for a few years now that I was attracted to women. I went through a phase of denial, telling myself this is wrong. I'm not a lesbian. I dated more guys to try to prove to myself and everyone else that I was straight. Of course, that didn't work. There was never any real attraction. I ended up giving more handjobs than I care to admit, and my only attempt at a more intimate encounter ended in a rather embarrassing situation. I finally stopped dating during my senior year, using schoolwork as an excuse. Late at night, I would often find myself thinking about women I admired, like the head cheerleader or my chemistry teacher. So, here's a brief overview of my life up until now. While I had come to accept that I was gay, I hadn't come out to anyone. First, because I hadn't had a girlfriend yet, and second, because I didn't know how the news would be received. I chose to avoid confrontation, and just went with the flow until it became necessary to come out. I didn't tell my mom or dad about the woman I met in the library. Honestly, I had no idea what she wanted, so I kept it to myself until I figured things out. I tucked the card into my purse and continued studying. That night, I went home and acted normally. There wasn't anything unusual about the day except that a striking woman had given me her card and asked me to visit her office. When I got home, I asked, "Where's Dad?" Apparently, there was an emergency at one of his company's other offices, and he had to go out of town on short notice to fix the problem, Mom replied. "Oh, he doesn't normally go out of town? Which office is it, and when will he be back?" "I don't really know. He never mentioned it. He'll probably be back in a day or two." As you might have guessed, Mom really wasn't that interested in Dad's activities as long as he was working and paying the bills. She didn't care much beyond that. At 10 a.m. the next day, I found myself at the door of a law office on the 5th floor of a building. I walked up to the receptionist, handed her the card that the woman had given me, and told her I had an appointment. She looked at the card, picked up her phone, and a couple of minutes later, the same striking woman from yesterday appeared. "Miss Compton, I'm really glad you came this morning. I have a feeling this could be a day you look back on very fondly. Please follow me," she said as she shook my hand and led me back to a conference room. "Would you like something to drink, coffee, tea, water, or a soda?" "Water will be fine. I've already had enough coffee this morning," I replied. She requested that Amber, the receptionist, bring in a cup of coffee for herself and a bottle of water for me. "First things first," she began. "My name is Carrie Hammond. I was your maternal grandfather's lawyer. The reason for this meeting is to distribute your share of his last will and testament. He left a video for you to watch, and then I will inform you of your inheritance. There will be several forms to sign in order for you to receive the trust accounts and other properties that you will be inheriting." "Wait a minute," I argued. "You're talking as if my grandfather is dead. I knew all three of my grandmother's ex-husbands, and I know that they are all still alive. Are you sure that you have the right person here?" She gave me a beaming smile. "Quite positive," she answered. "You know your grandmother's last three ex-husbands, but you never met or knew her first husband. The video will explain all of that." With that, she picked up a remote and started a video on the large flat-screen TV on the wall. The screen came on and showed an older man who was obviously very ill. A few seconds later, I heard Ms. Hammond off-screen telling him that the video was rolling. He looked back at the screen and began talking. Hello, Elisa. I know that you don't know me, but I know you very well. I am David Knight, and I am your biological grandfather. I know that you have been told otherwise, but Ms. Hammond has the proof that what I am telling you is the truth. With that, Ms. Hammond slid a thick folder across the table to me. 2 months before you were born, I discovered that your grandmother was having an affair. I filed for divorce and left. Your mother was so angry with me that she cut me out of her life and, as a result, your life. I was not allowed to see or communicate with you. Your grandmother moved her lover in with her, and you were always told that he was your biological grandfather. Since I could not have any contact with you, I began watching you from a distance. Once several years had passed and my business grew, I became successful enough to hire private detectives to keep track of you. I also kept in touch with your father. Obviously, this had to be done in secret. Don't think less of him for staying with your mother. While I personally don't agree with his decision, it was the right decision for him. He stayed because of you. He realized that the only chance you had to grow into the moral and caring woman you were was if he remained solidly in your life and could teach you the right values. Had he divorced your mother, your main role models would have been your mother and grandmother. He stayed to give you a real role model. Now that you are an adult and about to graduate high school, he has no more reason to stay with your mother. Ms. Hammond will explain more later. Now, for the matter at hand, since you are watching this video, that means I have died. I regret that I was never able to let you know about me and spend time with you. We actually met a couple of times, but that was in passing. I arranged those encounters so I could see you in person and say a few words. Since I divorced your grandmother, I have become extremely successful and wealthy. I am leaving most of my estate to you with a couple of conditions. Most of it you will not have access to until you complete college. Ms. Hammond will explain all of that to you. Some of it will depend on what you decide to study. With all that being said, I now turn the rest of this meeting over to Ms. Hammond. The video continued in silence for a few more seconds before ending. Ms. Hammond pulled a large file folder out of her briefcase and began explaining my sudden inheritance. First and foremost, this is a trust that your grandfather set up for your college education. It will cover all tuition, books, housing, food, transportation, and even a generous monthly allowance for entertainment or whatever else you need. It will also pay for a master's or even a doctorate if you choose to pursue that. Once you complete your degrees, you will gain access to another trust that will help you get started in your career without worrying about your financial situation until you are established. As for career choices, depending on what you study, you could have a position in your grandfather's company and eventually take it over. This would be contingent on choosing a business degree, engineering, or possibly a law degree. That choice is entirely yours. If you don't choose one of those paths, you will still inherit trust funds worth several $100 million. I was completely stunned. Here was the answer to my prayers about going to college. More than that, I could continue on to get my medical degree and become a doctor without the burden of student loans after graduation. What happens to the business if I don't go into those fields and take over the company? I asked. Then your father continues to run it until he retires and turns it over to whomever the board of directors names as the next CEO. You, by the way, will still own significant shares and even be on the board of directors when your father retires. You will be named chairman of the board, and when you retire, your heir will take over. The company will always be controlled by your family until the last heir dies with no heir to take their place. Wait a minute. You said that my father is now running the company. Well, not yet. You will begin once the divorce is final. That way, your mother will not receive any alimony. He is currently unemployed. But my father went out of town on business yesterday. Not exactly. He resigned from the company he was working for yesterday and moved into the house that your grandfather left for him. Oh, my mom doesn't know. Does she? Miss Hammond looked at her watch. She should be finding out in about 2 minutes. What do you mean? I asked. That's when the process server is supposed to deliver the divorce papers to her. She doesn't know. I need to call her. I was just pulling out my phone when her cell phone dinged. Too late. She has just been served, she replied, looking at the message on her phone. Okay, now what about those conditions you mentioned? Well, the most important is that your mother and grandmother are not to receive any benefit from your inheritance. The trust is very specific that only you are to benefit from it. The trust for your education is yours regardless, but it is only available for that purpose. The second trust cannot be used to benefit them, but I don't want them to be homeless or to starve. That's already taken care of. As part of the divorce, your mother will receive a small trust fund that will cover the rent and utilities for the mobile home that she and your grandmother live in, as well as a small monthly stipend for food and other necessities. There is one more thing, she continued. When and if you get married, there will need to be a prenuptial agreement. That is pretty normal for people with the kind of money we're talking about. There will be one unusual clause in that agreement. It will state that if you get divorced because you cheated on your spouse, the entire trust and everything else included in this inheritance will be transferred to your spouse. You will not keep any part of the estate. She continued discussing other matters and a few additional things I was to receive. After that, there was a mountain of paperwork for me to sign. Finally, there was just one more document for me to sign. How did you get here? She asked. I took the bus. I don't have a car. You do now, she informed me, sliding over the last document. I looked at it in shock. It was the title for a 1970 Corvette. Do you know how to drive a stick shift? She asked. Yeah, my dad taught me to drive his truck that has a stick shift. Good. Just sign this, and I will take care of the transfer of the title. It's parked in the lot. You can drive it home. We can work on the title transfers for the other vehicles later. Your father is currently checking them to verify their condition for you. Okay, I responded. I turned to leave, then stopped and turned back to my new lawyer. You know, I think I need to talk to my dad before I go back and see Mom and Grandma. Where's my daddy? He's at his new home, the house that he will be inheriting. He won't get ownership of the house until probate is complete. That will probably take about a year. He can live in it, but he won't actually own it until then. The divorce should be final by that time, so it won't be part of the settlement. She gave me the address of the house and I drove over there. It took me a bit to get used to driving this car. I had only driven smaller cars before, like Corollas and Acuras. I did drive my dad's pickup a few times, but that was an older Chevy with a 5.3L engine. The Corvette had a 455 horsepower engine, a 4-speed manual transmission and several upgrades. I loved the deep rumble of the engine as it roared down the road. The GPS lady told me to turn left into a gated driveway. As I pulled up to the gate, it automatically opened. I figured there was a transmitter in the car that would open the gate. I drove up the long driveway, which split into a circular drive by the front door and another path to a large garage. I saw a garage door open and my dad leaning over the front of the car with the hood up. I decided to park in front of the garage. Dad pulled his head out from under the hood and smiled as I parked the car. I see that you've been to the lawyer's office. He greeted. Yes, I actually just came from there, I replied. I think we need to talk. I have a lot of questions. I imagine that you do. I also have several things to tell you. I couldn't tell you about most of this before, but now that several things have happened, I am free to tell you the truth. First off, why was I never told about my real grandfather? That was because when your grandfather refused to go along with your grandmother's plans, she and your mother decided to exclude him from your life. They were so angry that they chose to pretend he never existed. Additionally, if you knew about him, you might have tried to contact him and potentially discover the truth. What is the truth? I asked. The truth is that your grandmother had been unfaithful for some time. When your grandfather started to suspect, she demanded to continue her relationships and your mother supported her. Your grandfather didn't formally divorce her. Instead, he withdrew all the bank and investment accounts and left. Your grandmother eventually had to file for divorce under abandonment, but by then she had lost everything and had to move into a mobile home. She couldn't find any assets, so she didn't receive anything from the divorce settlement. So why did Grandpa leave me his house and control of his company? Dad laughed. It's simple. Since your mother was so determined that your grandfather accept her actions, I decided to investigate on my own. Back then we didn't have much money, so he covered the cost of the investigations. Your mother was unfaithful to me as well. I had a DNA test done quietly and you were confirmed to be my daughter. If you hadn't been, I would have divorced her then. We didn't have much, so it wouldn't have cost me much. I discussed it with your grandfather, and we agreed that I would stay married until you were 18. I would then file for divorce and take over the company until you were ready to take it over if that was what you wanted. But how did you get the education and experience to run a large company? I asked. That was part of our plan. Those low-paying jobs were actually with your grandfather's company. He paid for my MBA while I worked for him. I had a compensation package where my salary was about $50,000 a year, but the rest of my compensation was stock placed in a trust which I would receive when you went to college. None of that will be considered community property. Wow, so you lived with her all that time knowing she was unfaithful? Yes, I did. I moved into the spare bedroom. You might have noticed that we never slept in the same room. I was more discreet than your mother. I have proof of her infidelities, but she has no proof of mine. We talked a bit more, then he gave me a tour of the house. Eventually, I decided it was time to head home. Dad offered for me to move in if I wanted, and even had a large room with an ensuite bathroom ready for me. I thought I might be moving sooner rather than later. As I pulled up to the trailer, the Corvette roared loudly. When I walked inside, Mom was having a tantrum, yelling, screaming, and throwing things around. She was clearly upset and furious. Every few minutes, she would stop to read something from the papers she was holding, then start screaming and cursing about what she had read. Even if I hadn't been told she had been served divorce papers, it was obvious what was happening. What's this about being unemployed so no alimony? That pig. She vented for a good 5 minutes. After she calmed down, she said, "Bonnie, this is just the beginning. I'll call my divorce lawyer and set up a meeting. After we get her on board, she will submit our counteroffer. When he sees that, he'll try to reconcile or we'll make sure he ends up with nothing. Actually, Mom, I'd rather use the lawyer that your second husband used. She pretty much dominated in court," I said. Grandma looked down, embarrassed by the memory. "Yes, well, she has rather old-fashioned ideas and won't represent anyone who has been unfaithful. Besides, you didn't notice, but she is already representing him." While Mom and Grandma discussed the divorce and legal representation, I went into the kitchen to make a sandwich. I returned to the living room with my sandwich and a glass of lemonade and sat on the sofa to eat. That's when Mom and Grandma finally noticed me. "Elisa, where have you been this morning?" Mom asked. "I had a meeting about financial aid for college," I replied. It wasn't entirely a lie, since it did involve the trust fund for college. "Oh, that's great. How did it go? Will you be able to get enough for at least a 2-year nursing certificate?" Mom asked. This was about to get a bit awkward. Actually, I'm deciding between Stanford or Harvard for my pre-med. After that, I'll look into which medical school to attend. Mom and Grandma exchanged looks, smiling as if they were humoring a child with an unrealistic dream, then turned back to me with expressions of skepticism. "Dear Grandma," began, "I appreciate your enthusiasm and hopefulness, but what scholarship could possibly cover all that? The best you could hope for in your situation would be a scholarship that covers tuition at a state university. You'd still need to cover room, board, books, and living expenses. Plus, that would only cover your undergraduate degree. Medical school would not be included. Yes, Elisa, perhaps you should temper your expectations a bit. You'd be better off going to the local college and getting a degree in something more practical. You could live here, which would be much cheaper than a dorm, and get a part-time job to help cover expenses," Mom added. "Oh no," I responded. The meeting assured me that the assistance I'm getting will cover everything I need, including tuition, books, and even purchasing a small house near the university for me to live in. It will also provide a $5,000 monthly stipend for food, entertainment, and other necessities. After I complete my undergraduate degree, it will cover any advanced degrees I pursue, leaving me with no student debt. What about transportation? Mom asked. No scholarship I've heard of covers that. Already taken care of, I said. I got a car this morning. Mom and Grandma were flabbergasted. What? How did you get all this? What kind of scholarship is it? Well, it isn't exactly a scholarship, I explained. It's more of a trust fund set up for me. A trust fund? Grandma asked, looking a bit pale. Yes, I confirmed. My meeting this morning was with a lawyer. Do you know a woman named Carrie Hammond? I asked. When there was no reply, I continued, she's a lawyer. Apparently, I was named in a will from someone I had never met. He was a billionaire who set up several trust funds for me, one for my education and another for after I graduated. It amounts to several $100 million. Mom screamed, who would do that? We don't know anyone with that kind of money. It's from Grandpa, I told them. That's ridiculous, Grandma stated. None of my ex-husbands had that much money and they're all still alive, so you couldn't have inherited anything from them. Also, Carrie Hammond was the lawyer my second husband used in our divorce, Grandma added. Don't you mean your third husband? I asked. Don't be ridiculous, Grandma huffed. I was only married 3 times. Really? So you weren't actually married to my biological grandfather? I asked. It's strange that you divorced him just before I was born if you weren't actually married to him. Seeing their shocked faces, I thought I might need to call 911. So you're telling me that you don't know anyone named David Knight? I asked. I watched a video this morning where he explained everything. I was given all the documentation supporting his claims, including DNA tests proving he is my biological grandfather. I went on. I also visited Dad, who provided more information. You two kept me from having a relationship with my grandfather, forcing me to live in less than ideal conditions and attend subpar schools. I read a letter from him stating he tried to help me get into better schools, but you refused. I also saw a letter where you demanded he stop the divorce and accept a role that would compromise his dignity just to be part of my life. You used me as a bargaining tool to control him. Now, as a condition of inheriting hundreds of millions of dollars and potentially taking over $1 billion company, I'm not allowed to use the money to improve your lives. Given how you treated my grandfather and used me, I have no interest in rewarding you for that. Fortunately for you, you were also named in his will. Grandpa set up 2 trust funds for you. One will continue to pay the rent on this trailer so you have a place to live. The other will give you a small monthly stipend to ensure you have enough food and other necessities. Anything else you need will be up to you to cover yourselves. Grandma looked shocked. Mom was just angry. I was pretty sure they had no idea Grandpa had been so successful after his divorce. Hundreds of millions of dollars.